Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. We say Jazakallah to you, the viewer, for staying with us here on DSTV channel 347. Now, 100 years ago, one of the great anti-apartheid activists, Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, was born. And of course, this is his centenary week. And in honoring the late great anti-apartheid activist, a new book is being launched called One Race. And of course, this goes ahead and discusses the life of Robert Sobukwe, his contribution towards Pan-Africanism, of course, his own way of taking on the apartheid government of the National Party. And it's, of course, a well-written book, which is being conducted by Professor Luvuyo Dondolo. And the professor joins me here to talk about this book, but also to look ahead and what it is that the life of Robert Sobukwe had inspired, not Pan-Africanism, but the actual anti-apartheid struggle as a whole. And he joins me in studio. Professor, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. And, of course, a very heavy book, which means a lot of pages, Professor Dondolo. But, I mean, it makes for fascinating reading. I think when a lot of people look at Robert Sobukwe, and if it's, first-time history class, attendee, he is really one of those unsung heroes that is in the face of the anti-apartheid struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he is one. He is marginalized for a number of reasons, and he was feared during apartheid for obvious reasons by the system, but also even post-1994, it seems like that, but for different reasons now. The main reason is that there is what I would refer to as Mandela mythology, presenting Mandela and the ANC as the sole liberation movement, Mandela as this messiah. So anyone or organization that challenges that narrative must be sidelined. It's better, though, to speak about Steve Biko and PCM, because some members of PCM later joined ANC. So, and that's why you find that they would use Steve Biko and PCM as this so in the middle, or to divide, there's this buffer between Sobukwe and Mandela. For instance, the exhibition that was launched when the Robben Island Museum was opened in 1996, it was Walter Sisulu, Mandela, and in between they inserted Steve Biko, of which Steve Biko was never incarcerated on Robben Island. So is this marginalization that continues now? But as I'm saying, Sobukwe forms part of that unwanted historical past. So post-1994, there's that fear that will challenge the dominant narrative.
I think when one speaks of black consciousness, there really is, and when you watch the documentaries of Robert Sobukwe, when you read the teachings of Robert Sobukwe, a lot of it is the awakening of the black South African. And it really has hit home hard when he speaks about that, the fact that there has to be that awakening only then to challenge the apartheid government, because what we had seen, of course, was really the cruelty of the apartheid government in suppressing the black African voice, and in that, trying to make them feel less than they were. Robert Sobukwe comes in and says, well, let's change that, because you are who you are. Embrace the blackness within you. And that's, of course, when you saw, the PCM really taking it to a whole new level.
Yes. Even though one can argue that there is a bit of maybe technical difference between black consciousness and Pan-Africanism, but there is a genealogy of ideas. If you go back, for instance, you go back in the 1800s, there was what was referred to Nsikane Kagaba. It was this convert, he was converted to Christianity, and made, when he was about to die, he called his children and the people, said, Zenibe imbumba yamanyama. That later evolved to be Imbumba Yamanyama, meaning unity. There must be unity and solidarity among black people or Africans. So I view that as he planted the seed of modern Pan-Africanism, because Pan-Africanism is about this unity, this solidarity, which then over years Sobukwe put his signature there. And you are right, Sobukwe used what he referred to as mental revolution, because he believed that you need to emancipate at a mental level, and so that you are able to challenge the status quo. Hence, Sobukwe and his peers, they use the term one race. There's only one race, the human race in which you all belong, because in a way, they were returning the gaze to the white people to challenge white supremacy. On the other side, they were problematizing the perception of the ANC of plural for racism. So they were arguing that there's no plural for racism. They were talking about multiracialism before they changed to non-racialism.
Sure.
So this one race challenges that, no, there's only one race in which we all belong. And they use that to challenge the status quo. So Sobukwe played a major role in his peers. And he was a teacher by profession.
Yes, of course, yeah.
He was a teacher, and I'm told by those who interacted with him or worked with him that I interviewed that there was just something about him. If you are with him in the room, there's no way that you can't feel the impact or whatever that he was saying. And that then was later confirmed by Andrew Young when Andrew Young visited him in Kimberley. So Sobukwe, yes, he is one of the great leaders that we ever produced, especially when it comes to the liberation struggle, because his view was more of at a continental level. The liberation or struggle was not just in South Africa, confined in South Africa, but linked to the continent, and to an extent that Sobukwe and his generation, they challenged this presentation of Du Bois. You know, Du Bois is presented as this silver bullet of Pan-Africanism that he influenced. But you realize that Sobukwe was more influenced by Kwame Nkrumah,
yes,
George Petmo,
yeah.
And others. Hence, before the 1960 anti-Apartheid campaign, Sobukwe sent Peter Rabaroko to Ghana, and Peter Rabaroko became the speechwriter of Kwame Nkrumah, Kwame Nkrumah's speechwriter. So he was a visionary, but someone who changed the status quo, because that 1960 changed the response from apartheid. We saw the banning of the political organizations, the exile culture, and then, of course, the military, the formation of the armed wings.
Yes.
But it's a pity that the National Party government imprisoned Sobukwe for a very long time, and even after he served his 3-year term, they continued under the Sobukwe clause. And that deprived the PAC at an intellectual level.
Sure, yes.
It affected the organization and in terms of its development. Because remember, it was less than a year when they embarked on this 1960 anti-Apartheid campaign, which they referred to as status campaign. That status campaign was planned to be ongoing until a point where the government of the National Party government perhaps...
And of course, 1976 was that, June 16, 1976 was really what one would call the actual turning point of so much here.
Yes. That is also another turning point, but there is a difference between the impact of 1960 and also the 76. And in the narrative of 1976 that is presented, because when Paulo Jordan wrote a piece on the Mail and Guidance celebrating the ANC centenary, meaning from 1912
to 2012,
to 2012, he alluded to the fact that they were not aware, or the ANC to a greater extent was not involved in the preparation or build-up to the 1976. And of course, BCM was at the center of that.
Sure.
But there's also a narrative that Zef Mutopeng, who was a PAC leader, was part of that, and some of the meetings were held in his house. And that challenges this separation between, some people present BCM as if there was no interaction or cross-pollination of ideas between the BCM and the PAC. To an extent that even Steve Biko used to visit Sobukwe in Kimberley.
Yeah.
So there is this cross-pollination, and that aspect is important because Zef Mutopeng was arrested and sentenced because of his involvement in June 16. But the dominant narrative of June 16 doesn't show that. And of course, you can trace it back perhaps to the program of SASO that culminated to that. Yes. So June 16 and 1960 were turning point in our history.
Just because 1 minute before we go to the break, Professor Dondolo, this book, I think when you read through the actual, chapters that are there, the importance of this book is to allow the modern generation to understand really what it was that Sir Robert Sobukwe was actually trying to, inculcate into the marginalized and the oppressed. And as a teacher, promoting this Pan-Africanism and black excellence, it resonates now with today's modern society, doesn't it? That awakening still needs to be within a person.
Yes, it does, because Sobukwe was, most of the time, people focus on him as this politician.
Sure.
But there's, as you said, the teacher, but also the intellectual side generally, because between 1954 and 60, Sobukwe was working at WITS in the Department of African Languages now, but it's African languages. And Sobukwe was there. And when he was there, he reviewed his Xhosa books, 4 Xhosa books. And you can see his critique of those books, which were written by the prominent authors at that time. So Sobukwe, to some extent, was ahead, or was the all-rounder. He was all-rounded in terms of, he was not just a politician, but he was also an intellectual that could interact with the gardener or the tea lady, unlike other people like Vilakazi, for instance. The Vilakazi Street that is in Soweto is named after Vilakazi, who was at WITS. But Vilakazi and A.C. Jordan were viewed as liberal, not radical. But Sobukwe was viewed as this radical intellectual, and also, of course, his association with the working people, and the fact that he would take a train from Soweto to WITS and walk. So his ideas are relevant even now, and this awakening, perhaps if we look at Fees Must Fall, it was also the awakening of the younger generation. But when we talk about that Fees Must Fall, we need to historicize that.
Yes.
Because in 1949, Sobukwe made a speech when he was a student at 410.
Prof. Dondolo, I have to stop you, unfortunately. Let's continue this conversation, because there's something that you've mentioned there which I want to go ahead and link to from an international perspective. I'm in conversation with Professor Luvuyo Dondolo, of course, the author of this book, One Race, celebrating the centenary of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. To stay tuned. Welcome back to News in Focus. Prof. Dondolo, I want to, from where you left off, of course, you're mentioning just the reawakening of many aspects of Pan-Africanism. We then go to the United States. Of course, you've got the rise of the Black Panthers that are happening within the 60s and the 70s. You've got Malcolm X who's coming out. You've got Martin Luther King, of course. Two different, obviously, supposed takes on American civil rights movements. You've got, Malcolm X, who was seen as more radical, which a lot of people exaggerated, but then you got Martin Luther King, who would prefer dialogue over supposed confrontation. And then, of course, I want to go to Palestine, because then you've got the rise of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, where you've got, of course, Yasser Arafat coming out through. It intertwines, doesn't it, when we come back to Robert Sobukwe, and just how Pan-Africanism and all of these global uprisings to each of its oppressions are somehow interlinked.
Yes, they are, to an extent that if you look in terms of the military history, there was this connection between the Yasser Arafat organization and the PAC, to an extent that some people were trained in one camp, and there's also a visit that in leaders like Sabelo Palmer, who was the leader of the year of Greystorm in the early 1990s. So there is this interconnection or interconnectedness. And of course, it's ideologically, more than anything, it's ideologically, and also the struggle, because the South African struggle was not just about removing white people, replacing with black people. There was also a culture aspect, the language. So it was multidimensional, and hence perhaps we can link that with other places across the world. And of course, with America, there's always this history of motherland connection. But you are right, Malcolm X was viewed more radical, which perhaps in South African context, it can have an analogy of Mandela and Sobukwe. I don't want to talk about the speech, I Have a Dream, because there's new evidence that was not written by Malcolm, by Martin Luther King. But there's something else. But yes, you are right, there is this cross-pollination of ideas, and also the support that was provided, because those who went to exile, the African Americans supported. For instance, Mama Angelou was married to one of the stalwarts of the PAC, Umage, and they helped the liberation movement. So there is connection at psychological and also practical in terms of supporting the liberation, especially maybe in terms of the armed struggle and those who were taken and went to America. For instance, the Sobukwe children were taken by Andrew Young.
Yes.
To go to Atlanta and study there because they were in different parts, others in Lesotho and all that. So they were then assisted to go to America. So Pan-Africanism is not about color. Of course, there are different perspectives of, Pan-Africanism. Yeah. There are people or scholars who present it continentally in terms of geographical location.
Muammar Gaddafi had a Pan-African idea, I mean, for an African economy to share the resources amongst the continent. So
yes.
You hit the nail on the head right there. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Which perhaps, if you look at Sobukwe's thinking at when it comes to policy, economic level or economic sphere, the policy, it was the free trade that the African countries should trade.
Sure.
And that, and also the support that we should give to each other as Africans. At times people misrepresent Sobukwe and say he was racist. And even APMDA is clear that Sobukwe and PAC were never anti-white. They were never anti-white, but they were against the white domination, the system. Yeah. And they guarantee no minority rights, no Freedom Front or AfriForum rights, so to speak, because the focus was on individuals, individual right, than the minority right. So if you look at Sobukwe's thinking, you find that some of the issues that we are grappling with now, Sobukwe provided a direction. Yeah. As early as 1950s, he provided a direction and what we should. And perhaps if he was still alive, he will be disappointed at a number of levels.
I was gonna come to that. The current ANC, African National Congress, there's many people who, especially those within the I won't call it the more radical, but the Progressive Caucus, for example, they've expressed their disappointment. And I don't want to go deeply political into this, but a lot of people felt that, a lot of political analysts felt, and even the ANC voters felt that they abandoned the ideas of the ANC by creating this government of national unity. Now, how would Robert Sobukwe view the current state of the African National Congress as this front for, you know, the liberation struggle of South Africa?
Sobukwe was not a reformist. What we experienced post-1994, it was in a way a reformist agenda to work within the system, or the existing structure rather. So the GNU is also the reformist agenda that is linked into, is more serving the interests of the business, not for the poor. It's not for the poor. I don't want to talk about the caucus in as far as the EFF and MK, because ideologically, EFF, they are singing from the same book with the ANC from Freedom Charter.
Yeah, sure.
So ideologically, there's no difference. Of course, within the MK, there are some Africanists or people who can be viewed as that, or who at a particular time they presented themselves as Africans. For instance, if you look at Chad Hlophe, he's coming from that tradition and worked with some people of the PAC. But I think what we need to do perhaps is multifold, because the general public or some people in some quarters feel like this is not working for them, or they were marginalized. Even if you look within, for instance, the PAC, there are some who view that there was no consultation.
Yes.
It was the decision that was taken by the by the current leadership. That's the space that I don't want to venture into, because I'm not a member of the PAC. I don't know the internal dynamics.
No, of course,
yeah. But the point that I wanted to make is that Sobukwe will be disappointed at many levels. Firstly, the land issue.
Yeah, because it seems to be dragging quite a lot. The fact that now all of a sudden the previous owners of the land, who of course dispossessed during colonialism and apartheid, there's nothing happening. Now there could be questions with regards to, for example, do they want to sell the land, have the money, or do they actually want the land for agricultural and cultivating purposes? But the fact is, when you look at the section of the Constitution. It seems to be a drag. It's been adopted in Parliament, but there's no real will. Yeah,
yeah, you know, it needs a political will. Hence, I said, put it bluntly, our leaders are the one who are...
Oh, you got a GNU that most of the political parties are against land expropriation, for example.
Yeah, no.
It's part of their policy.
Yes, it's part of the policy of the government. Don't expect anything from the sitting president of the PAC, who's the minister there, because he is operating within the framework that has been created. Except if he comes with a radical position and
but
also
that's not going to happen,
and also clear about the land issue, because there's a difference between land restitution and land restoration. You can't, because as we were saying, there's this willing buyer, willing seller, and there is a view that is purported that our people want money, they don't want land. I think we are oversimplifying the land issue is complex, and also who wants it. You can't just say, no, they're just selling land, they don't want money. We need to look at the value chain, the support that is provided. And also, because for instance, if you just go back history, down the memory lane, when the 1913 was introduced, there was what was called shared property in some parts in South Africa, where black people will enter into agreement with the white people who own land and work the land and produce. And even now, there are still people in some areas who can work the land, but they don't have support. And that was also affected by the Bantustan system that was created as part of apartheid. So what we need to do is the holistic approach to the land issue. There are people who want land, but the problem is the land at times is given to those who are perceived as if they were involved in the liberation struggle. Maybe MK and other people. But if we can just deal with the land issue politically and ideologically and deal with that, because as I was saying, Sobukwe would be disappointed by that. And also the status or the state of his organization, in my view, his party has been overshadowed by the past, by his past.
Sure.
They failed to redefine itself post-1990 or 94. And now is struggling to come into terms with the current state. Hence, perhaps the GNU was viewed as as an easy way, perhaps, to get into power. But that is also affecting some constituency of that organization, because there are those who believe that was a wrong decision. And as I said, going back to the view of the PAC in as far as the liberation and the freedom, because remember, is what... I
have to ask you to wrap in 1 minute, Professor. Okay. We just got 1 minute. You've written, it's over 500 pages, this book. In 1 minute, what would be the one thing that would stick out for you when writing a book of such a great personality within the South African context?
Sure.
I know there's a lot, because it is Robert Sobukwe after all.
Yeah, no, there's a lot. I think perhaps is to identify a gap on the existing literature, what is existing, and then try to close that gap, which is what this book is trying to do in as far as dealing with Sobukwe's thinking. Sobukwe's thinking, and within the broader context, of course, of the Africanist cause. So it will vary from the individual that one is writing about, but I think we need more of this. This is a contribution in a journey that we should embark on to debunk the myth in as far as the presentation of Sobukwe. And also some politicians, we heard Solima Payile a few years ago, the reckless statement he made about Sobukwe, that he was treated differently and preferred, which is not the case. So this is also an education both to the politician and the younger generation, so that they know what we went through, not just from the Congress Alliance perspective, but also even other organizations that were involved in the struggle. And it's a pity that as a country we have not honored Sobukwe.
Sure.
We have not honored. And I think the least we can do is to honor him.
Well, I mean, he's one of the greatest personalities in terms of the anti-apartheid struggle. And I could not concur with you even more. Robert Sobukwe needs to be remembered and honored for what he has done for the liberation of South Africa. Professor Dondolo, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure hosting you, and of course, we thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to talk with regards to the late, great Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Professor Luvuyo Dondolo, the author of this book, One Race, a really fascinating tale on the late, great Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, but it also touches on just the ideals that he would have wanted for a South Africa today. How do we need some of these ideals just to make sure that we have a country that is equal for all and it's just for every single South African? That's all I have for you here on News in Focus. From myself, for Hospital, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Stay beautiful, South Africa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.